This is etude number or study number 6 from Fernando Sor's Op.60. And there's 25 etudes in his Op.60. And the first ones are a little bit easier, and then they get gradually more difficult from the beginner level to the later intermediate. So number 6 is a real change. The first 5 etudes, not a lot of things to think about. Pretty much just like legato practice and various textures. Number 5, there was a full bass voice, so that was a bit of an increase. But in number 6, there's a new task that is definitely like an etude or like a real study for students. So follow the lesson for free and grab all the tips. But if you're interested, I do have an edition of all 25 etudes, and there's a link for that in the description. So number 6, what you'll notice is that Sor marks a number of rests at the beginning of bars, but then occasionally he'll tie a note over the bar. And I think this is a real indication that he's meaning to either for you to mute the sound of the bass voice or to sustain it. So if we look at that first line here, rest in the bass, rest, rest, sustain, rest, rest. So he clearly marks rests in some places, but then does a tie from bar 4 into bar 5. Now I have to imagine that is a clear indication of that he wants you to actually mute out the bass voice to clean up the texture a little bit. It would sound fine if you let things ring a little bit. And in some ways that sounds very legato, and in some ways maybe even a little bit better in some ways. But I think that there's an opportunity at least here to work on your muting skills. So you can use this, you can play this etude. If you're performing it, you can choose to either mute those basses or to not mute them. But there's an opportunity for learning here, so we'll be discussing that today. The weird thing about this, though, is that I don't think you need to observe all of the rests. You know, in some of the passages, it's clear that I don't think he would intend for you to mute the bass a lot. Like in bar 21, you know, I don't think he's intending for you to mute the bass each time. I think you can just play through. But, you know, you have to use your musical instincts a little bit here in terms of what would be appropriate for the texture or what you're trying to do. And what tempo you're going. It's not always practical at faster tempos to do lots of muting. The principle is very straightforward. I mean, you have a very clear melody in this piece, so practice the melody on its own. It's a nice clear melody. Bring that out. Make sure you're bringing it out nicely. But then in terms of muting the bass, I would practice from one point up to the rest that would indicate the muting. That way you can practice hitting the top note while simultaneously muting the bass out. Mute. So as soon as when you play that B with the I finger or M finger, then you're muting the bass note at the exact same time. And there, so as soon as you play that C on the 3rd bar, you're muting the 4th string with your thumb. Mute, mute, mute. So you're playing legato on that upper voice, but you're muting out a lot of those bass notes. So it's a different level of musical articulation and sensitivity to what's happening in the different voices. And just in terms of your right hand technique, it's not that it's technically difficult. This piece is fairly easy. It's first position, very common chord shapes, nothing awkward, but there's this extra element to think about. And that extra element can certainly you can certainly engage with it, and it will take up some concentration to do so. So on the first half, you can just go through, and whenever you see those rests, mute out that bass voice. And when you see a tie, like in bar 4 to 5, keep your finger down on that note and continue to sustain. But let's just do a walkthrough of the piece, and I'll just point things out as I go. I won't say mute every single time, but you can keep an eye on my thumb and see when I'm muting the bottom string. So there you're holding the bass note. But then you're muting on bar 6. Mute. That rhythm there, 1 and 2 and 1. It's just a little dotted figure, so you just want to lock the aesthetic of that rhythm in. When you go across the sections, and you're going from bar 8 to bar 9, just be careful that you might also want to mute on the rest there. You can't see the previous note because you've changed lines, but you might want to pay attention to that. So at the end of that section, C, mute, mute, mute. And then he doesn't write any rests here. So lots of sustain. He even writes some ties in the upper voice. On the second half, same thing. Remember, even though we're on a new page in my edition, you have a bass note ringing out. Mute, 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 mute. And, if you decide to mute the A there, I'll leave it up to you, but sometimes a little bit of sustain through this section is a welcome change. You might notice a fingering there. 2, 1, 3, 2. Because you have this 2, 1, instead of jumping my finger over, I just slide that second finger down and grab the E with my third finger. Same thing there, you're going across the section, but you do have an E ringing out. Mute, 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 mute. And then you can just play through this. Same thing here, I use my third finger on E. That way I can just slide into that shape. Instead of going and trying to move the second finger over, 3, 3. I think it's more legato and efficient. Some of those third finger things are not in the original by Sor. I update just like a small percentage, like 1% of the fingerings, or maybe more like 5% of the fingerings I'll update for modern guitar technique and to maximize legato fingering. So it's a really cool etude, and if you don't do the muting, don't worry. And if you're finding that the muting, you're just not at the level yet, practice it with just like in small tiny sections. Just 2 bars at a time, and learn the skill. But if you can't play the whole piece like that, then just play the piece, enjoy the piece. Don't let the muting get in the way of you enjoying the piece. Maybe you even like it better when it all sustains. But practice it in small sections so that you do learn the skill, because that skill will be needed later on. And it's a good opportunity to try it out.